what I'd like to do before, I'm going to read from one story tonight, but what I'd like to do before I start is sort of explain how I got the title Brief Eulogies of Roadside Shrines for my book. And it all started many years ago, probably 40 years ago, when I was traveling in New Mexico, and for the first time I came across these, what they call descansos, which are the Spanish word for resting places. And those are the shrines that are built along highways where people die. They're now ubiquitous all over the country. At that time, they weren't so much. And at first, I was sort of really unsettled by those shrines, because they made me, I drive by and I turn and I keep not wanting to think about them, because somehow I thought that they sort of reflected sadness and loss and grief. But then when I kept driving, and a lot of the shrines are sort of maintained every year, and flowers are put out and they're painted, they're really cared well for. And I realized that the shrines really bind the lever and the left, that in some ways they really hold the memories that they built together. And that sort of changed the way I began to look at shrines. And then when I started to write some shrine stories, I saw shrines in a different kind of way. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw shrines in a different kind of way. And I really saw them as celebrations, as sort of repositories of memories, in some ways a way of thinking about our place in the world. And 11 years ago, I wrote my first shrine story, which is a brief eulogy, which was actually published by Joy that long ago. And it was about a hobo who I met in the Sandhill country outside of North Platte, Nebraska. And I was traveling along and met this guy on the highway, and he invites me back to his camp. And first thing he does is he builds this big feast for me of his specialty of the day, which happened to be roadkill rabbit. He survived on roadkill. He had this whole way of figuring out if it was fresh or not. And then he started giving me this long, 2-hour discourse on what he called the great cosmic exchange of energy. And he went on and on and on, and come to find out that central in this great cosmic exchange of energy was a vulture. I won't go into all those details, but he really had it laid out. And I spent 4 hours with him and never saw him again. And between that time when I was in my late 20s and when I first started writing his story, it was 35 years, and this guy still haunted me. His name was Arnold. So I decided to write a story about him. And central to that story, at the end of the story, there's a shrine which hangs on a telephone pole on Route 80, which marks the camp that he lived in. And the shrine has a coyote skull. It has some of his old raggedy clothes, and has vulture feathers. Arnold would have liked that. I'm going to show these guys. This is the shrine. Okay.
Can you show me, Mark?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so that's one story. And then this is a 1951 Pontiac Bonneville hubcap in cherry condition, as they say. You can see there is Chief Pontiac gazing off into the horizon. Let me just show it to these guys. Got it? Okay. Okay. This hubcap is in the centerpiece of a large shrine built in a junkyard that has hundreds of hubcaps in it, all from wreckages of people who died on the highway. And it was built by a preacher who had been a snake handling preacher, had lost the anointing when he was bit by a rattler snake and was kicked out of his church by his congregation, ended up being a caretaker in a junkyard, and found faith and redemption there. And that story is called Aaron's Auto Salvage and Restoration.
Restoration. Salvation.
Salvation. And then I'm going to show you one more shrine before I start talking about my story. So this is a metal detector, the kind of, when you're down in Atlantic City, you see people all over like looking for gold and rings and coins and stuff like that. Metal detector. Got it? Okay. Oh.
Camera loves you.
Now I forgot the story. Oh, this metal detector hangs on a tree in an ash grove outside of North Fork, Pennsylvania, along the northern tier where Potter County is. Jimmy Bolton, when he came home from Vietnam, developed this condition that he called minefoot. He was afraid to go outside because he was sure if he stepped down on the ground, he would hit a mine and he would be blown to bits. So he wouldn't go outside. So his buddy Bernie buys him this mini mine detector so he can go outside. So he wanders all over North Fork with this thing. In North Fork, or in the northern tier, they have a saying which says that wounded animals aren't left to graze alone. And in some ways, this is a story about how a small village tries to keep one of its own afloat, and in fact how hard that is, and sometimes it just can't be enough. And that's what that story's about. So now I'm going to talk a little bit. Are you guys comfortable in the back? I'm feeling bad about you having to stand all this time. Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little, I'm going to introduce my story, Holy Roller. And in Holy Roller, there are 4 main characters and 1 minor character. Nuncio is the narrator. He's a 20-something-year-old who lives in South Philly in a row house. The other main character is Anthony, who's a pigeon. Okay? Okay. All right.
Marco,
Oh,
we want you to talk sideways.
Here, hard.
Sorry.
What does that mean?
Where is it?
You play more against the
Face both crowd.
Oh, okay. So I should, okay. So I'm going to, is it okay if I stand here?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Stand again, yeah, a little bit by the door.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Okay. Okay. So the other character is Maddie, who is Nuncio's true love. And one of the more important characters is Stella Maris, who actually is on a church in South Philadelphia. As you can see, she's the Virgin Mary. Stella Maris means star of the sea. And she's holding in her, next to her breast, instead of her baby child, she's holding a ship. She is the patron saint of lost sailors and wayfarers. And she plays an important role. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, no more show and tell after this. Okay. Okay, great. And then there's a minor character who is Nuncio's friend Dante. Okay, so here's the story. On first look, Anthony don't look nothing special, your basic white bird, but I assure you, he wasn't no dumb street pigeon grubbing for handouts. I climb up here every once in a while just to check him out, make sure he's secure and all. Feel that breeze. Helps me breathe, like maybe things are going to be all right. Look close there. See that breast? How big it is? Like a goddamn weightlifter. That's because he's part Homer. I'm talking English Homer, the kind that raced 1,000 miles in 3 days, breed them for speed and endurance. Did you know that the Army used these little mothers in World War II? On account of the radios and walkie-talkies weren't too reliable in those days. Paratroopers in the Signal Corps, they really called them pigeoneers, carried them in a special vest made by the Maiden Form Bra Company. I dreamed I was off in Hitler in my maiden form. Took them to the front and tied messages to their legs in tiny cans and sent them over enemy lines through smoke and gunfire. The Krauts trained falcons to snatch them before they completed their mission. Jerry Falcon at 1 o'clock high, a feathered battle for the skies. Those babies were on the D-Day invasion, flew home across the English Channel. One even got a Purple Heart. I think he's in somewhere in a museum in Washington. I'm going to go visit him someday. But that ain't all. I know Anthony's dead, but if you look how his neck's cocked to one side, you can still see it, that dizzy spinning that rollers get. He's half roller. I bought him from a guy in New Jersey. Over there they got these contests to see whose birds can tumble the longest. These binoculars and stopwatches. Serious shit. Big money. Of course, if the bird hits the ground, they're disqualified. By and by, they all die, get careless, or maybe their balance apparatus gets out of whack. from all that spinning. They get this crazy glazed look, like they can't quite focus. Their head tilted to one side, like that look that Johnny Bone Crusher Stompanato got when he hung up his gloves. But it's in their blood. They ain't happy if they ain't rolling, like Johnny when he wasn't boxing. You'd have a miserable, lousy bird on your hands, pacing, fighting, plucking out its feathers, finally just withering away. So you gotta let them roll until they crash and burn. So Nunzio has this crush on Maddie, they're both seniors in high school, but she's in a whole different league. She's taken chemistry and physics, and she's applying to college. She's heading out to someplace else, and Nunzio's working he's taking shop classes and pumping gas at a gas station. So he sort of feels like he's going nowhere, and that she's out of his league. One day after school, I'm taking Anthony over to the Navy Yard to let him do his tumbling thing, then fly around for an hour or so before heading home, keeping him in shape, you know. Anthony's in the basket I got strapped in the back of my bike, and Maddie's out in front of Argento's Deli. Hey, Nunzio. And I'm like, hey, what's in the basket, she says. And I say, you wouldn't be interested. Try me, she says. So I do. I start up on my man Anthony about his tumbling and homing. Now I'm in a groove and I do my rap about living life, how rollers are meteors and street pigeons are moons. So, are you a meteor or a moon, I ask. And I know right there, the way she looks at me, I'm on first base. I can see her thinking, this guy's a poet. Then I tell her I tried to take out a life insurance policy on Anthony and there weren't no takers. She laughs and I'm thinking, she's thinking, he's funny too. Wanna watch, I say? I can tell she's contemplating, like a fish checking out the bait. No thanks, I have to work on my English paper, should get home. I gotta do this, sorry. This is Anthony talking. I pull Anthony out of his basket and hold him up to my face, real close, like he's a feathered mask. Please, Maddie, come watch me fly, please, please. She looks down the street like she's checking out to see if her old man's watching. Chomp, hook, line, and sinker. All right, 30 minutes. So Maddie comes over to the Navy Yard and watches me and Anthony do our thing. I had a little drama and whatnot, talking to Anthony quiet and kind of affectionate. Oh, he's sensitive with animals too. Then throwing him in the air, not just opening the basket and leaving him take off like usual. Well, Anthony puts on quite a show. Me and him are a team working on Maddie. He does 4 or 5 warm-up laps to stretch his muscles and get his bearings. Then he starts climbing, circling, higher and tighter, at least 500 feet. Maddie's lost him. Where's he at? She says, and I point him out, a speck in the sky. Suddenly, Anthony stops flying, like somebody shot him. Bam! His head dips and his tongue tucks his wings and feet. Maddie breathes in real hard as Anthony goes into his roll. Tight somersaults over and over, straight down. There's this whistle as he picks up speed, the air rushing through his tail feathers. And every time he rolls, you can see the flush of sun reflected in his orange eyes. He hits at least 70 before he pulls up 40 feet above us. Maddie does this hand clap thing that drives me crazy, and Anthony goes into a climb for an encore. So, you want to go to a movie tonight, I ask? That's all she wrote. The rest is history, big time. So Nunzio and Maddie become an item, and she's going off to college, and he's sitting there pumping gas and trying to figure out what to do with his life. And Maddie's sort of ragging on him, saying, you know, what are we going to do with it? Where's your future? So he decides to join the Marines. You know, it'd be a chance to get out of South Philly, a chance to see the world, and get his GI Bill, come back, go to college, marry his sweetheart. Perfect dream. But as luck would have it, he ends up on the first wave of the march to Baghdad. I shit you not, this is a true story. You know about the siege of Baghdad, right? How we had all this amazing equipment, pinpoint laser-directed rockets and bombs, could drop them down a chimney. No collateral damage. American ingenuity at its finest. In basic, they prepared us for the deadly agents that they were sure Uncle Saddam was going to drop on us. We had high-tech gas masks with $200 canisters drilled over and over again, until we can put them on in 12 seconds flat. We had Humvees equipped with super sensors that could detect nerve gas, 1 part per million. Before heading over to the border to Iraq, we spent a week in Kuwait, in the desert, one final run through to make sure all systems were go. Come to find out, the gas sensors weren't too reliable when tested in battlefield conditions. They got all clogged up with sand dust kicked up from the tanks. Come to find out, Arab sand was a whole different ballgame. So they needed a backup. So one of the corporals, this beanpole from West Virginia, told how his daddy used to carry canaries down in the mine to detect gas. When the birds stopped singing, it was time to head north. Canaries is too frail for the desert, the brass figured. Then this first sergeant, a Banty rooster Puerto Rican who used to fight cocks, said they were the toughest cabrones around. So they came up with this plan to use Rhode Island red roosters as sentinels. They needed sentinel poultry specialists to take care of the birds and march with them into combat and give the word to the CO the minute one of them croaked. Given my experience with pigeons, who are officially poultry, I was considered an expert. In no time, I was in command of 10 reds in cages strapped on top of 5 Humvees, and on March 20th, our unit headed out over the desert toward Baghdad in 110-degree heat. Every half hour I'd check the cages, and sure enough, another damn rooster had croaked. I'd inform the CO. He'd shout out, "Everybody, put on your mask," and all hell would break loose, and panic would break loose. I had serious doubts about there being any gas. So one time I kept my mask off. Sure enough, the pathetic birds were dying from the heat. You know, pigeons are much tougher than those weenie chickens, I says to the first sergeant in charge of gas warfare. Street pigeons are the baddest. They're uglier than hell and they ain't got no class. But growing up and scratching out a living on the asphalt of big cities toughens them up. So on day 2 of the march to Baghdad, we used a pigeon as our gas sentry. And sure enough, when the sun went down, that little mother was still standing. So I was sent to Kuwait City with a special unit to snatch 200 heat-hardened pigeons off the street, bring them back to the front. It was so hot, my boots stuck to the asphalt, while those little fuckers went around barefoot picking crumbs like they was walking on grass. There were women all covered in black with those beady eyes staring out through those slits while I stuffed the birds like they was thinking this damn American's going to cook them up for dinner. So things head downhill for Nuncio while he's in Iraq. And after a few months, he's discharged with an honorable discharge and sent home. It took more than 11 months before I knocked on Maddie's door. Now I'm back in Philly working the pumps at Angelo's. She's home from college on vacation. I came back from Dad wearing a Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal and a combat action ribbon. No scars or shrapnel, nothing you could see. But it was like my navigation system was out of whack, like I'd lost my sense of direction. There are things they don't prepare you for in basic training. Things you see, things you smell, things you hear, things you do in your march to victory, things you bring home and never get rid of, like the desert sand that sticks inside your nose and ears and under your nails. You think you can live with it, but it's always there, reminding you. You dream of coming home a hero, but you just come home different. So Nuncio's a wreck. He's distant, he's withdrawn, he sleeps all the time. Maddie's trying to help him, says you got to go to a counselor, and he just won't have it. He's just completely withdrawn, and after a few months, Maddie gives up and breaks off the relationship and goes back to college. So this is back to Nuncio. Anthony didn't last too long after I got back. Dante didn't work him much when I was gone, mostly just fed him. I could see the sign. My bird had plucked most of the feathers from his chest, his breastbone sticking out of his bone like the keel of a boat. He was dying to roll, being cooped up so long. So I started taking him over to the Navy Yard, but he wasn't himself. He rolled like he wasn't sure which way was up, like he'd lost the horizon. Instead of coming to me, he'd sit on top of a telephone pole, trying to figure it out. Then he'd take off and try another dive, but after a couple of rolls, he'd pull out of it. I knew it was just a matter of time. One day his gyroscope conked and he caught a telephone wire. Pretty bad. I recuperated him in his coop for 5 days and tossed him into the air to see what he could do. His right wing flapped like a banshee and his left wing just hung there at a crooked angle, him spinning around, crashing to the ground like a helicopter that had been shot down. Then I saw the bone sticking out of his elbow. I did what I had to do. Late at night down the gas station, I kissed the back of Anthony's head and put him in a plastic trash bag. I tied the bag around the exhaust of a '98 Ford pickup waiting for a tune-up and turned on the ignition. I held the bag until it stopped jumping. Then I climbed into the cab, switched off the key, and fell asleep with that bag in my lap. So one day, Nunzio runs into Maddie. She's home from school at Argento's Deli, and they have a conversation and just throws him for a loop. And then he just is doing nothing but sleeping and trying to get to work. And he spends what day when he's not working and sleeping, sitting on a stoop. There was this once I did talk about it. One night, I'm closing down the pumps. Dante pulls up in his Camaro and says, "Hey, let's tip a few at Parnelli's." About 5 years later, sitting at the bar, Dante taps me on the knee and says, "Hey man, you know we're proud of you, how you did that. We should have all signed up to go put that fucker down. And Anthony would have been proud of you too, helping pigeons make their contribution." He chuckles at that. I can't say anything for a while. Then I tell him, "You know what we did with those pigeons, that Humvee flock?" "No man," he says. "What'd you do?" About 6 weeks into my tour, we let them go one by one. Dante nods like he's got the picture in his mind. There was this Iraqi kid, maybe 10, maybe 15, you really can't tell with Arabs. He's hanging around asking for cookies and pretzels and shit. We called him Ahab. "Hey Ahab," he says, "toss those birds into the air, one at a time." "That's cool," says Dante, "like, let freedom ring." "Yeah," I say. Then 6 or 7 of us blasted away with our M16s on automatic. Poof, nothing left, not even any feathers, obliterated, like they never existed. "Damn," says Dante, and don't say nothing. I'm working on my 6th or 7th beer now. "That ain't all." "What ain't all?" says Dante. "That ain't all we obliterated." "You don't have to tell me no more, man," like he's trying to go easy on me. A couple days before we let the pigeons go, we're sitting in the square. It's noon and you could fry a damn steak on the sidewalk. So we're all hanging under this awning. The speakers in the minaret of the mosque across the square start blaring out the call to prayers. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, God is great, Allah is great. Anthony's impressed. "You know how to talk Arab?" "That's it," I told him. Heard it 5 times a day, no matter where I was. People head for the mosque. The traffic stops. The square is totally silent, like the volume's turned off. Not a damn sound. Even the dogs stop barking, like they're praying too. Muslim dogs. I'm sipping on a Coke, enjoying the peace and quiet, when all hell breaks loose. We're taking fire from the 4th floor of this apartment building. Ta 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 ta. An AK-47. Then a pause for the shooter to reload, then ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, over and over again. So 2 of our Abrams tanks swivel their turrets around and let loose a shitload of 120 millimeter shells into the apartments. Instant rubble, then smoke and flames, then this huge explosion, a butane gas tank we figured. "That's war, man," Dante says. 20 people fried, trapped in there. Maybe 1 sniper. Ain't no way to describe the sound people make when they're burning to death. Screaming, howling, wailing, all at the same time, like a goddamn choir in hell. We both stare into our mugs like you do when you got nothing to say or when you said too much. Dante holds up 2 fingers. The bar guy uncaps 2 buds. Me and Dante take a long sip at the same time, both of us staring into the mirror. There's this kid, maybe 5, runs out of the building and collapses, cooked like a French fry. His eyes burn out, his face gone, How the fuck can you scream when you got no face? Now he's sprawled there on the street, clothes burnt off, raw meat, that smell, and silence. Thank God the poor bastard's dead. May he find his 40 virgins in hell, in heaven. Give me a hand, soldier, says a medic. Let's get this little guy off the street and over to the morgue. We load him into a body bag, zip it up, start to drag it over to the Humvee transport. Suddenly the bag's writhing and screeching like there's a goddamn alligator in there. It won't stop. I look around for a mother. Thank God no mother to hear this. She's probably already smoked. Writhing and screeching. No way this kid can live. No way. We pull the bag over to the Humvee. The medic unzips it 3 to 4 inches, signals to me. We slip the exhaust pipe into the opening. Dante stares up at the TV. Flyers are up 2 to 1. He drops a couple of bucks for the bartender. There's more, I say. Let me take you home, pal, he says. And that's it.